For a few weeks there, after the Corbin Burns trade, we thought the Orioles might have had one of the best 1-2 punches in all of baseball. And then Kyle Bradish went down. So the question is Grayson Rodriguez a good enough replacement there at number 2 to make the O's still a World Series contender when you look at their rotation? We'll talk about that with Andy Kostka from the Baltimore Banner coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast.
You are Locked On Orioles, your daily Baltimore Orioles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, Orioles fans. Today is Thursday, February 22nd, 2024, and welcome back into the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Connor Newcomb, and today I'm going to be joined in just a moment by Andy Kostka. He covers the Baltimore Orioles for the Baltimore Banner and has done a great job covering spring training so far. He is coming to us from down in Sarasota, Florida. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. So we welcome back in Andy Kostka. He covers the O's for the Baltimore Banner. He is in Sarasota. He is on the beat right now. He is covering this team as he has done for the last couple of years. And I'm sure, Andy, you are excited for 2024. I'm sure you're excited to get back to Baltimore. I guess I'll ask there, like, how much is too much Florida in spring training? How much, at what point does it flip to like, I need to get back home?
Immediately. I'm not a Florida guy, not a Florida man, which maybe is a good thing to stay out of the headlines. Yeah, but Florida's a nice change of pace every once in a while. The pickleball games down here are great. I've been balling a little bit, but yeah, I'm looking forward to get back to Baltimore and to Camden Yards.
Yeah, that's what we're all feeling right now. It's still February. We're still more than a month away, but thanks for coming back on the show, Andy. We had to talk pitching here. I mean, this is obviously the biggest story out of Orioles camp so far. They add Corbin Burns. We're looking at, maybe a top 10 rotation in baseball. It's been since the 80s, maybe, since you could say that about the Baltimore Orioles. And then Kyle Bradish goes down. Then John Means is a little behind. I think your reporting and others about John Means has made it seem like, okay, he might not be ready for opening day, but unless another thing goes wrong, the O's should have him for most of this season. But I did want to start by just asking you, what is the latest update on Kyle Bradish? I know he's been throwing a little bit in the last few days, but where do things stand right now as we record on Wednesday, February 21st?
Yeah, so we've seen him first day he threw. Last week was about 40 feet or so. This is light tossing, so nothing that strenuous. We've seen him do some pitcher's fielding practice where he's actually done underhand tosses to first, so nothing strenuous there. Then I believe it was yesterday, so Tuesday, February 20, was when he did throw from maybe 90 feet inside the main stadium. In the Ed Smith Stadium complex here in Sarasota. It was, again, pretty light. He's not using any spin from flat ground. So this is just kind of the testing period. What we do know at this point, we don't know much beyond that, I'll be honest with you. But what we do know is it's a UCL sprain. What that tends to be is, either a partial tear or a more full tear, but probably a partial tear in this case that he's playing through it. He had the PRP injection, which does, it shows that, yes, something is teared in that UCL. And that is it can be an effective way for a more minor partial tear. It can be a non-surgical remedy for, a UCL injury. That's what we know. That's what we know right now. He's going to continue to ramp up slowly with these non-strenuous throwing exercises and see how his right arm feels. In the meantime, it's kind of just a day-by-day thing. It's really hard to know, to kind of have a crystal ball of whether on day 10, on day 15, is it suddenly going to start hurting? Is something going to go backwards? So at this stage, we really are just kind of at that wait and see moment where he will continue to do work. In the meantime, you have to assume we know he's going to start the season on the injured list. So you just kind of have to assume that, maybe the first month is definitely not here. Anything beyond that's a little murky. It's not a great prognosis. Oftentimes this leads to Tommy John elbow reconstruction surgery, which is not an easy thing to come back from. And I know, we've seen John Means, who you just mentioned, he's missed the better part of the last 2 seasons because of Tommy John surgery. And now here he is in the off season. He hasn't had an injury setback or anything, but just a slower ramp up period to kind of give him more time to let the arm rest this offseason, which is why he's a month behind schedule. So it's a serious injury to have. And, best case scenario, Kyle Bradish comes back and is as good as he was from basically all of 2023. Worst case is he misses the 2023 season, but it's really hard to know the exact timetable.
Yeah. And it's got to be tough because, now as you have him throw, as you get the PRP injection, like, I don't think we're at this point yet, but at some point, if it's going maybe not great, but okay, at some point, as you're avoiding surgery, you get to the point where if he eventually gets it, he's missing a good chunk of 2025 as well. And I wonder, like, what the balance is there for the Orioles. Like, I know when this happened with Felix Bautista last year, it was like, hey, we've got a month left in the season. Can we shut him down for a bit? Can we give him the injection? Can we get him back for the playoffs? He's that good. We know he's going to miss next year no matter what. Let's try to get him back. This calculus is a little bit different because the O's are clearly going for it this year after trading for Corbin Burns, knowing he's a rental, but also Kyle Bradish has got 4+ years of team control. Like, you want him around for beyond this year. So I was just wondering your thoughts on, like, what do you think that calculus is? You obviously want to avoid surgery at all costs, but it's a big decision. Maybe not right now, but a month from now, they're going to be looking at a pretty big decision.
Right. I actually asked Mike Elias that exact question of what is the calculus, to use your word, of whether you have surgery now to potentially in the long run have him back healthy for maybe even 2025, part of 2025, or if you wait, he might miss the better part of 2 seasons. That is a really tricky decision for the front office, and because it's never a great. You don't want to go surgery if you can avoid it. Surgery is kind of it's number one, a super long recovery process, and it's for serious cases. So if they feel like it's not as serious of a case and they can avoid surgery, that's going to be first priority. Mike, when Mike Elias was discussing this, he quickly pointed out, as you did, that there was a difference between Felix and Kyle Bradish here. And number one, the timing of Felix's injury, they felt like, who knows, they could maybe have him back in some form for the postseason. Didn't work out. And Mike also said that they were fairly confident that they would need surgery eventually for Felix Bautista, which at the time he didn't. He was very coy at the time and not giving that information away. But in hindsight, he said that surgery seemed to be the clear option. He seems fairly confident that they could avoid surgery with Kyle Bradish. So, I mean, we'll see as the weeks and months continue of Kyle Bradish and as he throws more. But he was, Mike Elias was saying that it's a different situation because they don't think there's not a guarantee that eventually Kyle Bradish will need surgery. So that's the first main difference between him and Felix. And then the second is just the timing. Felix, they felt like they should just keep him throwing just in case. This is more a throwing program because they think they could possibly have him back in 2024 pitching substantial innings. Very tricky. I don't have a good answer for you, but yeah, I don't think the O's have a great answer either because this is a tough spot to be in. You don't necessarily know whether to rush a surgery when you could avoid going under the knife, which is always preferable. And it's a risk because what if he does need surgery later? It's not enviable.
It's a tough decision.
Yeah.
Nobody has the answers. That's the thing. Like, we can talk about it as much as we want, but the Orioles don't have the answers. Kyle Bradish, Mike Elias, they don't have the answers right now. So it's certainly going to be tough. We'll get to the meat of this episode coming up next. To the healthy pitchers still, Corbin Burnes and Grayson Rodriguez. They're going to be 1 and 2 in this rotation, at least for the beginning part of the season, without Kyle Bradish. And we'll talk about what that outlook is for the Orioles. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is brought to you by Gametime, because you shouldn't have to worry when you're buying tickets to your next big event. Gametime is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their best price guarantee, Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. And they make it so easy because you can buy the tickets on their app with a flash deal for the best price, and it's sent right to the app. You don't need to dig through your email or your text to get that ticket. It's right on your phone. You scan it and you walk into the stadium. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDON. That's LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. So we're here with Andy Kostka of the Baltimore Banner, who covers the Baltimore Orioles. He is down in Sarasota, Florida. We are talking about the O's top of the rotation without Kyle Bradish. And this is a point where it feels pretty good that the Orioles went and got Corbin Burnes. Now, obviously, as we look back, we know the Orioles knew of the injury to Kyle Bradish back in January before they made the Corbin Burnes trade. And although Elias has talked about how they pushed for that trade all offseason, I'm sure it put it into another gear after Bradish went down. And you talked to Corbin Burnes and watched his kind of first live BP earlier this week. And all of a sudden, despite the fact that Burnes had kind of introduced a sweeper last season and it was awesome, he's got another new breaking ball out there. And I didn't know Corbin Burnes could get better, but maybe he can in an Orioles uniform.
Yeah, I mean, he looked phenomenal in that first live session. He did not actually like his cutter command at all in that live session. What he has proven throughout his career in Milwaukee and will continue to do so this season is that great starting pitchers can have a lack of feel of 1 or 2 pitches and find a way to get outs with their other offerings. And that was the case. Ryan O'Hearn had a great single, would-be single. It's a live batting session. There's no fielders, but would have been a single, a pretty hard hit line drive into shallow left off a cutter that Corbin wanted it under the hands. He didn't get it under the hands, and Ryan O'Hearn inside out of the pitch. That will happen. So he was very, Corbin Burnes was critical of himself for leaving that pitch there. But what we saw the rest of the time against the slew of left-handed hitters, so right on left matchups, was his curveball looked great. He had his traditional 12-6 curveball that he had against Adley, and Adley popped it up into center field. And then suddenly a pitch that none of us really knew. Cedric Mullins didn't know what it was. It dove at about 84, 85 miles per hour towards Cedric Mullins' back foot. Mullins swung through it. It was right on kind of the edge of the zone, so it was probably a good swing decision, all things considered. But Mullins asked some of the analytic guys, like, what the heck was that? Slider? Was that a slider? No, that was a new curveball for Corbin Burnes. And I was talking to James McCann about this new curveball. So he has basically, let me back up for 1 second before we get to James McCann. Corbin described it as he has 2. So he has the traditional 12-6, about 78 to 80 miles per hour. That has been a great curveball for much of his career. That won't change. But in 2-strike situations where he thinks he can get a strikeout, especially, it can be especially filthy against a left-handed hitter, he could have this mid-80s curveball that is sharper and goes right to the back foot of a left-handed batter, and it's an incredibly hard pitch to hit. And James McCann kind of likened it to I guess Charlie Morton, for the Braves, when he had, one of the best curveballs in baseball. Charlie has. He has different varieties kind of for different situations. And this is kind of that case where you can have a different style of curveball when you really need a punch out. It could be a huge asset for Corbin Burnes, just adding to a cutter. His changeup is again, a really good pitch when he pairs it with the cutter. just a little bit different action. Looks pretty much the same coming out of the hand. The sinker looks the same as the cutter, except it drops instead of has run. So he has a lot of different options, and suddenly he's going to pull out a new curveball in some situations. Interestingly, I mean, you mentioned the sweeper last year. He pulled out about halfway through the year. He did the sweeper because, in his own words, his slider sucked. Was what he told me. It didn't really suck. The batters the first 3 months hit like 222 against it. Like they were not like lighting his slider up by any means. But in his lofty standards, it was not to what he wanted. So we introduced the sweeper. He's not really focusing on the sweeper this year. He said he likely will not use it, although he did throw one in a bullpen session yesterday, where he didn't like how it felt actually when it came out. It didn't have as good of a run. He probably won't use the sweeper because he really worked all offseason on figuring out his traditional slider again. So he feels more confident in his mid-80s slider. Less, it runs more than his cutter does. Will not have, I think he had like an average of 12 horizontal inches with his sweeper last year. So just, a crazy pitch, but he's not going to use the sweeper as much, but still could pop up from now and then. But yeah, I think Corbin Burnes he's a savant at adding pitches when he needs one. He can take away a pitch if it doesn't feel good that day. This is a very, very, high quality pitcher, and the best pitchers in baseball know how to constantly adapt, add new things, take away things that aren't working well. And this is what we're going to see in Baltimore all year. It's going to be very, very interesting.
Yeah, it's going to be great to have an ace at the top of this rotation. And also just to think that he goes to the sweeper, and he seems to be one of those guys who's kind of more on the what's a sweeper train. It's more of this is just a longer slider. This is just a slider that moves more, but whatever works for him. But it's nice to know that if Corbin Burnes hits a rut at any point this year against right-handers, we know exactly what worked for him last year, and he could pull out that sweeper hopefully at any time. He's got the new curveball. He's got a lot of good pitches. This is how good this guy is. And so the question kind of is now, you thought you had Burnes, Bradish, Rodriguez. Now it's more Burnes, Rodriguez, Kramer in the top three of the rotation right now. And it probably puts more weight on the back of Grayson Rodriguez. So coming up next, we'll finish off the pod to talk about him. And he's made some changes this offseason as well. And now he's stepping into even a bigger role. Can he fill those big Kyle Bradish shoes? We'll talk about that coming up after the break. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is also brought to you by FanDuel. You can get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 just if your bet wins. You can do it with quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props, and more. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to shoot your shot with FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NBA. So we're here with Andy Kostka still from the Baltimore Banner, who covers the O's and is down in Sarasota. And I wanted to finish off by talking about Grayson Rodriguez, because there's no secret now. He is the #2 starter in this rotation, at least to begin the season. And the O's obviously hope they get John Means back already and healthy, and they really hope they get Kyle Bradish back and healthy at some point this season. But until then, Grayson, who did start game 2 of the playoff series last year, so he's been in this role before. Now, it didn't go great for him against the Rangers, but he's moving up a role with Bradish being out for at least a little bit of time here. And you've written about how, he's changing a little bit this offseason, what he throws and how often he throws it. And I just wanted to kind of start with, with the changes he's made, you can talk about him a little bit. Like, do you think he's ready to step into even a bigger role? Like, can he have a Bradish style 2023 season? Because if he does, that is going to be huge for this Orioles team.
Yeah, I never want to put too much pressure on a still a young pitcher, but I think Grayson has all the tools to have another breakout season. He looked phenomenal the second half of 2023. The playoff game did not go his way. I talked to him about what happened in that playoff game, and he said he was trying to throw the ball through a brick wall and just, was overthrowing. And by overthrowing, he was missing spots, and that just, things unraveled on him in the postseason match. But I do think he's a great candidate to be a breakout guy. He has he kind of discovered last year that what he needs to focus on is fastball command. His four-seam fastball is really, really good. Has a lot of life to it. And he actually is looking to add a two-seam as well. He worked on a two-seam this offseason. Probably won't be a huge piece of his repertoire. I don't mean to make it seem like he's going to throw 20% two-seamers and 40% four-seamers and just forget every other pitch. He's still, a four-seam dominant guy, but the two-seam could be a really interesting thing, really against both righties and lefties. You got to think suddenly you're adding a pitch that can still come out at 95 that has a little bit of arm side, cut under the hands of a right-handed hitter. You could, for a left-handed batter, maybe it just squeaks out of the zone at the last second. That it could be a huge asset to him, as well as the four seam, and he has great other pitches too. So there's no worries there about his other pitches. But I do think he could be a big take another jump. And basically the jump would be, I remember talking to Kyle Gibson last year about the biggest jump for guys as they get more established in the league as a starting pitcher. And what it really is maybe it's not the stuff per se, but it's just the consistency. It's being able to go out there and perform at a high level more frequently. And that is going to be the big question for a guy like, Grayson Rodriguez. Can he do it consistently? We saw the second half of the season. The answer was a resounding yes. The first half of the season, 5 good starts and 5 poor starts. It was exactly 50-50. And that was so emblematic of a young 23-year-old at the time. I believe he was 23 at the time. That happens to a young starter. So I still imagine that there will be bumps along the road. This is a 24-year-old having a huge responsibilities until John Means and Kyle Bradish come back, if Kyle Bradish comes back. But John Means expected to come back. But I do want to emphasize this is not on Grayson alone. You have Corbin Burns, you have Dean Kramer, who had another pretty good season last year. You have 2 kind of open spots at the back end of the rotation that you can assume go to Tyler Wells and Cole Irvin. Tyler Wells, phenomenal first half, was the best Orioles pitcher in the first half last year, and had to go down to AAA, some arm fatigue, had a reset, came back as a great bullpen piece late in the year. But expect Tyler Wells right in that mix as well. I think he could have a great 2024 as a rotation piece. He feels, I have a story coming up Friday, I think, on Tyler. He feels like he proved himself. He can be a starter in this league. Just the next stage is, can he do it over 162? That's kind of the next question. We'll see exactly how it all shakes out. But you also have guys like Chase McDermott and Cade Povich who have impressed in AAA, and they could be in that pipeline if you need a guy midway through the season. That there's a lot of interesting starters on this roster. Bruce Zimmerman, worked a lot this offseason to and was injured for a lot of last year with a core injury. So you have, it's not just Grayson Rodriguez, but Grayson could be he has a big responsibility. And I think he can really step up to the plate for it.
Yeah, it'll be big for Grayson, but also, as you said, like, if Tyler Wells can get through a full season as a starter, that would be incredible. If Cole Irvin can just be what he was in Oakland, that would be huge for this Orioles rotation as well. Yeah. And again, those younger guys, maybe if they're ready, doesn't have to be early, but maybe in the second half, if the Orioles need some arms, and especially if obviously Bradish does have to miss the whole year and more. And I don't think the O's are expecting 190 innings out of John Means. You just can't expect that at this point. So they're going to need some depth, and you always have the trade deadline where you could go out and add something if you needed to as well. But Andy, thank you so much for joining us today. Before we go, let everybody know where they can find your work, where they can read your work as you continue to bear on in Sarasota here in the much warmer weather. But it sounds like not your favorite state to be in.
Yeah, nothing against any Floridians listening to this. It's a great pickleball state. But yeah, subscribe to the Baltimore Banner if you can. $1 for 6 months right now. It goes up a little bit after that, but we got to make a living. So if you don't mind subscribing, that'd be great. And my Twitter's right there. Same username on Threads. Been trying to post on Threads as well, so you can find me there.
All right, he's on Threads as well. You can check out Andy's work at the Banner along with Daniel Allentuck, John Mioli, Paul Mancano, pretty much everybody over there who is covering the Orioles this spring training and throughout the season. Andy, thank you so much for joining us once again.
Yeah, thank you.
That was Andy Kostka of the Baltimore Banner. We will be back tomorrow with one more episode, final roster group preview for the Orioles in spring training. We're taking a look at the outfield. 3 spots pretty much locked in with Mullins and Hayes and Santander, but there's either 1 or 2 more spots beyond that. Who could take it? Could it be Cowser? Could it be Kjerstad? And could Jorge Mateo slide into one of those roles as well? That's coming up on tomorrow's pod. But until then, that's been Andy Kostka. I'm Connor Newcomb, and this has been the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.